We're back with our panel for some analysis. Ben Domenech is the founder and publisher of The Federalist. Amy Walter is the national editor of the Cook Political Report. David Nakamura covers the White House for The Washington Post. And Molly Ball is national political correspondent for Time magazine. Good to have you all here. Amy, we spoke just now to one of the 2020 candidates, latest to jump into this race, Tim Ryan. Were there more Democrats needed in the candidacy?
Yes,
it's a pretty crowded field.
We need to have, an even number, maybe, of 20, or maybe we can get to 30.
And we're not done yet.
We are not done yet. We still have a couple people to go. Obviously, the biggest name being Joe Biden, waiting for his announcement. Look, I think each one of these candidates believes that there is an opportunity to fill this vacuum right now that is out there, that there are some front runners, but they have a pretty high floor and a low ceiling at this moment. And everyone's waiting to see if they're going to wear well over the course of the campaign. Those two front runners, of course, being Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Is the party really looking for two 70-plus-year-old white men to lead their party, or is there room for someone else from a different generation, a different background, et cetera, to fill that? I think fundamentally what's fascinating in watching where the two frontrunners are at this moment, who the frontrunners are, is how the different strains of the Democratic Party, the two strains of the Democratic Party they represent, with Bernie Sanders believing that the Democratic Party wants a revolution, and Biden saying a restoration the way the things were pre-Trump.
Molly, we heard the former vice president try to quiet the controversy this week, and then he seemed to start a whole new news cycle by making light of some of these allegations of making women uncomfortable and how he dealt with their space or touched them at some time. I mean, has he derailed his own candidacy before he's even announced it?
Yes, obviously. I mean, this is not what he would have preferred to have as the backdrop to his eventual announcement, if that's coming in a couple of weeks. That being said, I don't think we know yet how this plays. What I hear from the majority of sort of rank and file Democrats, there's a lot of affection for Joe Biden. And, as Speaker Pelosi said this week, most people don't see this as disqualifying in itself. But they want to talk about it, and they want to hear him talk about it, and they want to hear a satisfactory answer from him. And he hasn't necessarily provided that so far. He hasn't necessarily given people a way to think about this that satisfies the concerns. Number one, the concern about whether he understands where these women are coming from, whether he really understands what women face, because that's such an issue in modern culture and because women are the majority of Democratic voters. And then the second is how it affects his potential electability. If he's going to want to be the nominee against Donald Trump, can he make an argument against Trump on these same issues where Trump has been accused of all kinds of unwanted touching of women? Can he make that argument, or will that be nullified if he has similar issues? What
struck me, too, was that, Biden has put off making an official decision about entering this race for a number of months now. There was some sense that he would do it early this year. Now they were saying, by the spring, maybe now after Easter. So his campaign or campaign in waiting would have had a chance to maybe think about some of these issues and think that these kind of things could potentially derail him. So not only has he allowed this issue to become a bigger issue than it might if he had been sort of more proactive in trying to address it, but they didn't seem to really have a thoughtful way to respond to some of the... And
it was red meat for President Trump, who tweeted that video.
Yes, that sort of mocking video of it. I think Molly's completely correct that we don't know how this is going to play yet. And this was always going to be something that was a challenge for someone who had this in such a public way. But the thing is, Biden is also viewed as being someone who's fundamentally a decent man and is respected by a lot of his colleagues and people he's worked with over the years. And so it's difficult to put him in the same category as some of these other people who've engaged in bad behavior towards women. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind in weighing the different strains of the Democratic Party that Amy pointed out is Biden is, by every measure, the most popular candidate or would-be candidate among African-American voters. Now, a lot of that is due to how well he worked with President Obama, but it's also due to a lot of faith and trust that they place in him. I think one of the big challenges in figuring out what the Democratic Party wants for 2020 is how those voters come to grips with a strain of the party that wants far more radical perspective, far more progressive policies at the center of their agenda. And those different things that are both key parts of the Democratic coalition, suburban white voters who want to go in a more progressive direction, African American voters who maybe want something that's more of a restorational approach, as Amy said, that's going to decide who ends up bebeing their choice.
Amy, what is there to what the former president, Barack Obama, said about the rigidity within the Democratic Party? I mean, he's kind of saying there's, a narrow-mindedness in the liberalism of some of the candidates these days.
Well, and you saw the Washington Post had a great interview with Nancy Pelosi this week as well, who's been making the case that the Democratic Party is just as dynamic as any other party. There's one piece of the party that gets a whole lot of attention. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has gotten more attention than any member of Congress, certainly any freshman that I've ever seen get this amount of attention. Bernie Sanders gets a lot of attention. But Democrats won control of Congress in 2018 because of moderate or middle-of-the-road voters who appealed to suburban voters in what were Republican-leaning districts. That is the argument that's where the core of the party is. And Ben makes a very good point. The core of the Democratic electorate is women, as Molly said that too, African Americans and voters of color, about 40%. But they're also older. And it's painful saying older, meaning older than 45. Apparently that's old now, but that's where these voters are, right? So older voters have gone, if you're over the age of 45, you've gone on the same path that Joe Biden has of what the Democratic Party has been. What was okay in 1998 isn't okay now. What was okay in 2000, not okay now. And he represents the ways in which so many Democrats have come to that point. And we're going to see, are they comfortable with that being their image?
David, there's also another argument within Democratic Party circles right now, and that is kind of what do we do with the Mueller report? How do we approach the possibility of the I word, impeachment? You heard Congressman Nadler there acknowledge that, that's not the entire motivation, but impeachment could be a possibility in terms of what is looked at in these 400 pages if they are indeed turned over to Congress as expected.
Yeah, so I think what you saw from your interview made clear that I think some Democratic leaders realized that the initial framing by the Attorney General was sort of aimed to sort of tamp down the idea that Democrats would continue with these investigations. But I think some of the public polling has shown that very clearly that much of the country, I think a CNN poll said over 50% believes the report did not exonerate the president. So I think Democrats are encouraged by that to maybe move forward more aggressively. And I think President Trump's early suggestions that he's okay with the full report coming out, now the president himself is walking some of it back.
And you heard some of that from his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who said, well, it could be public, but I don't have control of that.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, I think their message is that, the president goes to the campaign rally. I was with him just last week. We were talking about a complete exoneration. I think there is a sense that, what else is out there? Certainly, there's concern among his team that, as this comes out, it could be more worse for him.
But when it comes to impeachment, the argument that you heard from Rudy Giuliani today and that you hear from the president and many of his defenders is that the Democrats are dying to impeach the president and they are looking for absolutely any pretext that they can get to go down that route. My impression from my reporting on the Democratic leadership in the House in particular, it is exactly the opposite. They would prefer not to go down that road because they don't see it as a political winner. They see it as divisive. They are dying to find an excuse not to. However, they feel they are being led ineluctably in that direction by their investigations, by the things that they have found, by the things that we already know about the president. And so if the Democrats, through their investigations and through the evidence, come to believe that, that the president, many of them already feel that the president has abused his power, violated the Constitution in whatever different ways. Not saying that that's correct, but since they believe that, if they do truly believe that, they are going to be led ineluctably down this path, they're at least going to have to answer the question, if the president has done these things, why aren't you impeaching?
Impeachment is a political decision. It's not a legal one. And politically, Molly's completely correct. The leadership of the Democratic Party does not want to go down that road. They took these lessons away from the Clinton experience in the 90s, and they don't want to go in that direction in this context. But there are also a lot of new members who weren't around in the 90s and don't necessarily feel that way. And they tend to be the ones who have an outsized voice within the party at the moment. And they speak for a lot of Democratic voters who, frankly, the polling tells us that they were in favor of impeachment before the president was even sworn into office. So I think that the problem there is just the loud nature of the wing of this of the Democratic coalition that does want impeachment is not going to be tamped down on at all by what comes out of any of these investigations.
And yet voters also don't seem to be swayed by anything that will come out that has thus far come out from the Mueller report, anything that is likely to come out from the Mueller report. I mean, this president has had the narrowest trading range in terms of the highest highs he's ever had and the lowest lows he's ever had in polling. It's only 10 points. We've never seen a president with that narrow of a difference between his highs and his lows. And to me, that's not going to change. I don't know that there's anything, quite frankly, that's going to get the president's approval rating much higher than 45% or much lower than 35%, no matter what comes out through all this. And so the question in 2020 is, where is he in that range going into the election? Is he closer to the 45%? That's good for the president. Is he closer to the 35%? That's a lot better for the Democrats.
So standing in the middle of Fifth Avenue, was it? Still stands. David, we did see the president hit the campaign trail himself in the past few days. He went out to the border in California. He went to Nevada, to Las Vegas, to this gathering, a Jewish Republican gathering. What is he trying to do here? I mean, he keeps characterizing the Democratic Party as anti-Jewish.
Well, I mean, I think the president is, whether it's that issue or others, I mean, he's really trying to galvanize this base. I mean, this was an event in Las Vegas with Jewish coalition, and the president talked quite a bit about his policy with Israel. And, he had Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House just a couple weeks ago and seemed to make sort of a gut decision to come out on Twitter and endorse Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which was an important issue. And some folks think it's, sort of this idea to help Netanyahu win re-election, but it's also Trump himself, has been, really sort of messaging to that base of support. And so he combined an issue with the border, where obviously that he believes that's going to be a key issue here as well. So he's really playing to the group of 40% that he believes really will carry him through this cycle.
And what is the status of Jared Kushner's Middle East peace plan? Because as you say, the president has endorsed some pretty hardline viewpoints, though they were very popular in Israel.
Right, and this is a long-standing peace plan that's been worked on, according to the administration, for a long time, the granddaddy of deals. But it seems like it's somewhat, being considered dead on arrival at this point. I mean, the president, you hear a reaction from the Arab states that say, if this is a kind of rollout of a peace plan where the president is endorsing very closely the Israeli point of view already, they don't see a lot of potential success for this.
Or at least Benjamin Netanyahu's point of view. And he said, I guess, in the past 24 hours that he would annex the West Bank if he is reelected, which the administration has not commented on. But Ben, sorry, Amy, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I just also wanted to go into the point about the 40% where the president's choosing to lean in on. I mean, the one place where the president does have high approval ratings, it's not on foreign affairs, it's not on immigration or immigration policy, it's the economy, where his approval ratings have consistently been 9, 10 points higher than his overall approval rating, and yet he seems to just be unable or unwilling to lean into that and spend. Most presidents would be spending 99% of their time doing nothing but that.
Right.
He is doing everything but talking
If anything,
about
I mean,
that.
you shut down the government for 35 days. You had Larry,
talking about shutting down the border.
Yeah, you had
which
Larry
would be
Kudlow here
of
talking about he didn't know what would
economic
happen, or trying to sort of find lanes that would stay open on a border shutdown to try to keep that economy going. The president tends to, sometimes be his own worst enemy in that regard.
Why is the president messaging on immigration this week and messaging on, well, I guess healthcare was on and then it was off in terms of before or after 2020? Why do that?
He talks about whatever he wants to talk about. He doesn't listen to anybody who wants him to talk about the economy or something like that. Of course, to Amy's point, that any other Republican administration would be hammering it away on this. Instead, he just he sees something and he goes after it. And he's never going to stop. And so we shouldn't expect him to.
Right.
get ready for the re-election campaign. All right.
It's what he loves.
Thanks to all of you. We're going to be right back in a moment.